live streaming already?
Yeah, we're live.
Oh, how long has that been? How long has that been?
Oh yeah, I guess I should.
Plan: the United States federal government substantially reduce restrictions on legal immigration by discontinuing Presidential Proclamation 9645 through ruling by the Supreme Court. Contention 1 is discrimination. A court ruling on immigration destroys the plenary power doctrine. Only previous decisions are keeping it alive. Kagan 15. A U.S. citizen and then challenged refusal to grant visa to their Afghan husband denial and virtual right to marriage as a matter of due process. State Department order a specific explanation. Share 1. The plenary power doctrine has been overruled. Government authority to regulate immigration free from review. What's assumed to be as high when a non-citizen not entered by the den came close. Winning for justice to search challenge. Divide the other privately to use analysis based on doctrine while not renunciation was not reaffirmation. Doctrines on fragile ground. Justice is made divide about how to bring the doctrine down. And travel ban brought through plenary power. Racism goes unchecked. Lippman 18. The court quoted a case that relied on Chinese exclusion and justified that immigration ends away from judicial review. The court justified authority over immigration in terms other than racism. The idea behind the doctrine no longer acceptable. Invoking the president's authority over immigration allowed the court to turn a blind eye. Andrew ban case shows the plenary power doctrine enables blatant racism and immigration constraint. Power leads to open and unapologetic abuses. The court told the president he is right in that court will not stop him. And travel ban is inherently discriminatory and fuels racism. Namel et al. 18. There is overwhelming evidence the O3 has been on disapproval of Muslims. The president wanted to ban asses and teamed to find a politically correct pretext for the anti-Muslim rhetoric was not sloganeering his backed by specific agenda at all. A call for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the U.S. press for justification. Trump cited the internment Japanese Americans. Trump replied that the program would be no different than the FDR when Trump first announced that he's a Muslim ban. Trump's plan to implement a ban followed by the chaotic release or context enough to infer the exclusion of Muslims as the purpose behind Trump's executive orders. And failure to overturn travel ban fuels violence and ruins livelihoods. AIC et al. 18. The harms caused by a deprivation of voting right, no matter how irreparable, is a true for harms to First Amendment, the laws of freedoms, and constitutes irreparable injury to U.S. citizens, and LBRs unable to receive visits from loved ones who live in the banned country. The proclamation prevents visa applicants from studying or teaching at U.S. university, damaging personal and professional lives and harming our educational institutions, singling out nationals from Turkic countries to stigmatize Muslim citizens or anti-Muslim during the president's campaign has made Muslim citizens fearful. And travel bans, state-sanctioned demonization of Muslims creates a culture of fear and hostility, providing pretext for globalized violence and sacrifice in the name of security. Islam 627. The process of dehumanization leads to crimes against humanity on marginalized groups. The ban is within the larger picture of systematic racism. The travel ban is a term that sanitizes what is a Muslim ban is a term of bigotry that targets who are Muslim or perceived Muslim. Civilians and living in countries on the list have been on the receiving end of U.S. airstrikes. The U.S. justifies its violence on a narrative that all Muslims are prone to terror and civilian casualties are just the price we need to pay for national security. The factors of racist policies has more to do with the color of one's skin than religion. The practice and narratives we use matter. The national security apparatus relies on the story that Muslims are the greatest threat to American ideas operate so smoothly because we choose to believe and educate us safe. The impact of Muslim women, children, and men are often savage mantras. For now, we can change the narrative that dehumanize them by the policies that indiscriminately harm. Contention 2 is solvency. Court reviewing immigration cases destroys immigration exceptionalism. Kagan 15. Zydvis versus Davis president what the government could indefinitely detain deportable non-citizens when the U.S. was unable to find another country willing to take them. Court found the government's authority subject to import limitations. The court acknowledged and deportation would be worse than imprisonment for some people. The court continues to hold the government as immigration authority to traditional doctrine do not limit rights so much as it did limited review. Others required for exceptionalism to end would be for the court to review immigration cases against constitutional doctrines. And a complete a court establishment clause reasoning results in complete elimination of the ban. Lurie 18. Plaintiffs suggest Trump's anti-Muslim statements illustrate religious animus and invalidate the ban under the Establishment Clause. The Supreme Court's ruling allowed travel ban in effect. This goes with the bans against both temporary non-immigrant visas and immigrant visas for permanent resident status. And only clarifying the court's precedent can legally enshrine First Amendment protections against broader forms of anti-Muslim discrimination. Shabaya 18. The court's decision while representing the meaningfulness of the First Amendment's protection against religious discrimination ruling in favor of the government would send a message that political leaders can denigrate religion and proceed to implement policies that target that religion without consequences, such as the impact of cutting the court of the Establishment Clause. The U.S. and the Muslim ban as a touchstone of the attack on Muslim communities and effort to chip away at their ability to live freely and equally. The significance goes beyond specific legal issues, constitutional protections to mean something all should know, but the court repudiates government sanctioned religious bigotry and discrimination. What is at stake is the guarantee of equality. Contention 3 is framing. Rejecting racism should be on par with presumption. Justifications for inaction are merely ideological constructions to preserve the existing order. Parker 14. System justification theory people are motivated to rationalize the way things are so that existing arrangements as legitimate and the preservation of the status quo is the impetus for people's actions to maintain the current social order even when contrary to evidence people preserve the status quo and just hierarchies, racism, and other oppression will rationalize actions to preserve this sense of being good, morally minded people. This process is supported by ideologies. People use fashion to judgment. Ideology drops in the background and affects our unconscious. Systems justify ideology support people to leave their belief systems unexamined and silence keeps the unjust hierarchies in place. And challenging the racist order is a prior ethical question. It makes extinction structurally inevitable. Memi 2000. The struggle against racism is a struggle to be undertaken without concession to give it merely full means to diminish what is human. The anti-racist struggle is one that prologues the ultimate passage from animosity to humanity. One cannot find a moral order on racism, injustice, engenders violence and death. All unjust societies contains within itself the seeds of its own death. And ignore high magnitude, low probability impacts. That is a form of fear politics that creates an epistemological bias that artificially inflates the probability of extinction events while marginalizing considerations of violence that happens on a daily basis. Jackson 12. National security and big threats distract you from structural violence. You're far more likely to die from lack of healthcare than terrorism to nuclear missiles, from lack of road safety than illegal immigrants, politicians, and the media spend time talking about terrorism, nuclear programs, hackers, the threat of China, which are unlikely to affect you. The state spends vast sums on security, which have no actual risk, and then engages in massive displays of security theater. This is meant to come see these threats are serious, while the rulers of society are hoping that you want to know social and economic inequality, domestic violence, and poverty kills millions. They're hoping you want to know structural violence, while trillions are spent on military weapons and theater. Security is misdirection on epic sale to distract you from the structure. Oh, I already read that. Sorry. I'll just read it just in case. Security is misdirection on epic sale to distract you from the structure and inequalities which are real threat to you and commit you afraid so that you will acquiesce to all measures which keeps you under state control. Keeps this in mind next time you hear a politician talking about the threat of uncontrolled immigration. If you hear that immigrants are a great threat, you have been well and truly conned. You're more likely to die from anyone that forced self-reform structural violence in society than you are from immigrants. And forefronting debates over immigration policy is key. Rennick 17. Democrats have few clear ideas of reform. The left have no idea of how much immigration is desirable or how it ought to be regulated. We can arrive at a more open immigration system where privately legislative fixes are legal changes that might slightly ensure that people who are eligible for immigration relief are apart from getting an asylum law could make a huge difference. When nearly 1 in 5 fail, there are numerous other wonkish policy changes that waste no longer bills comparatively less fanfare. The fact that immigrants have access to legal representation is not known among liberals of the insecure mandatory lawyers number of bills before constant Democratic Party to be publicizing this as a major problem. And our rhetorical framing refocuses debate around questions of social justice. National security discourse psychologically conditions debaters to accept everyday violence in a zero-sum with shifting the conversation. Voss 18. Debates focus on preventing people from starting country from arriving in the first place. This framing is intended to post 9/11 world, protecting our borders. It's about preventing the next September 11th. Fear of terror has become a dominant narrative. The travel bans, climate is threat to voice scrutiny is attempting to frame the debate that those on the side are forced to spend arguing foreigners are not threats. Instead of addressing social policies, none of the countries included have been tied to any terror attack in the U.S. Politicians and media are framing to the vocabulary that reduces sympathy, increases fear. Framing bias allows the national security framing to narrow the solution instead of avoiding social issues. We need to change the debate. And pragmatism centered on weak ontological claims is the best process for reflexive political contestation. 9/16. A pragmatic approach rejects the idea of foundation of truth and being anti-foundationalist. A pragmatic approach can be context-dependent and provision. Any ontological claims must always be open to interrogation. Mark the card interrogation. Would you like to marked copy?
Anyone not ready? Okay. What was the Supreme Court's basis behind their decision?
The Supreme Court's basis was that it was textually neutral and thus it deferred to the presidential authority to continue with this travel ban.
Okay. In the word of the AFF, does the court go back and re-look at the case?
Yes, this is a form of judicial review.
Okay. And then the AFF is saying they switched their decision, correct?
Well, switched their decision using like establishment clause reasoning. I think that's 2018, and review setting a precedent for the case. Yeah.
Okay. How will that spill over to check broader executive power?
Right. The Shabaya 18 evidence. The Kagan 15 evidence in Solvency specifically mentions that if they review immigration cases specifically against constitutional doctrines, that limits the executive power to what he can do normally, but that limits him from providing unconstitutional actions.
Okay.
Did you start time?
Yeah.
Okay.
What nations is the travel ban affecting?
Currently, I'm not able to specify all the countries, but right now, I believe it's Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, Middle East, Yemen, and a few other Middle Eastern countries.
Okay. How many of those countries have had influence by other nations in their past?
What do you mean by influenced by other nations? Every nation is influenced.
Case like nations coming in, trying to establish control, like settlement, that sort of thing.
Well, we contend that like settlement is the process of that like every single country had to have settlement.
Okay, why is pragmatism good?
Pragmatism is good because it offers a legitimate way to approach legal reform while still considering weak ontological claims.
Okay. Your first card on your discriminatory advantage, your Kagan card, talks about how this judicial review of the act will destroy the plenary power doctrine. Can you describe how that works for me?
Right. What the AFF is trying to do is it makes it so the precedent is drawn to take down national security exceptionalism, the idea that anything that Trump or the executive branch has to do with immigration is above the eyes of the Constitution.
Okay, does the AF's review and the ruling made in the AF change the plenary power doctrine as a whole?
The plenary power doctrine could still be applicable, but it will still be under judicial review to make sure that constitutional doctrines won't be violated.
So post-AF, the court will also be reviewing the whole plenary power doctrine?
No, post-AF, the court will only make it if they have ideals of constitutional violations.
Okay.
everybody ready?
Speak order.
Okay. It's gonna be 2 off, and then on case. Okay. Now is everybody ready? Okay, is everybody ready? Settler colonialism is not an event but a structure of permanent invasion, distinct from regime of settler society that of unending occupation and abuse of indigenous lands as property makes necessary the erasure of native and property of Shetesla. Glen 15. National and regional racial systems may be unique because they have grown out of distinct material, social, and cultural circumstances. Settler colonialism, the concept of settler colonialism as structure, as a framework that encourages and facilitates comparatively within and across regions and times. Settler colonialism in its intention to acquire and occupy land which to settle permanently. Settler colonial policy has been the ultimate erasure of Native Americans. Settler ideology, justified elimination. Settlers brought to intensify and cultivate for both cultivation and extraction. Settlers in all regions enslaved Native Americans. Wetland land taken from the indigenes and black chattel slavery was a private property regime that converted people, ideas, and things into property. The elimination of Native Americans have anchored U.S. racial formation. The racialization of certain exogenous others have been a prominent feature of settler colonial societies. Racializing certain groups as insufficiently human serves to justify subjecting them to oppression, subordination, and super-exploitation. These practices were designed to immobilize and disable workers' ability to survive by other means, thereby tie them down, the theoretically free workers. These forms of coercion may be labeled de facto slavery, and the libertarian humanitarian ethos of immigration reforms rooted in the nationalist myth of the U.S. as a city on the hill, shining light upon the world. Such exponentialism positions the U.S. as a benign factor to paper over the continued disposition of indigenous territory. Until 2015. The pull across nation-state borders is a project of settler capitalist project. The settler needs a story that can obscure violence. It is why it is this white settler hero who is the figurehead for fantasies of equitable social mobility based on lawfulness and hard work. The narratives intertwine with structures that occur and protect property for the white settlers, justifying those inequitable processes as mere outcroppings of meritocratic practices. Despite the pro-migrant platforms that use entrepreneurship and assimilation, the current push and pull of vulnerabilized human labor, the real prospects of racially minoritized peoples attaining wealth holding settler status are low. Trump perfectly embodies a generationally protected white male settler wealth that racializes migration in order to reinstate nation logic of xenophobia and protectionism for its own material interests. Trump's rhetoric is born of pathologies of independent immigrants. The answer to contingent citizenship isn't found in kinder, gentler rating of contingency. The answer is dismantling of citizenship as an enterprise of exclusion. And immigration policy coheres the logic of the end of history by rendering borders immutable and governable through a central unending sovereign, disavowing the historical contingent borders of the settler state naturalizes the colonial condition into an indefinite future. Goal 2015. The absence of indigenous people in immigrant law is apparent in the fact that the key concepts of the field cannot address the actual relationship between the nation-state and indigenous people. Aliens have been considered citizen and alien. This non-recognition reflects how immigration scholarships think about space. This presumption also shapes how the nation-state's governance inside its territory is conceived. The erasure of indigeneity also reflects how immigration scholarship conceptualizes time. Immigration scholarship generally presumes that not only borders are spatially fixed, largely forgotten are how the states came to be. Discussions of legitimacy have said nothing about the land which the state is created. The immigration law presumes an all-powerful national sovereign regime regulating the movement of individual aliens, some of whom are excluded, some of whom are allowed on temporary basis, and some of whom may someday be recognized as the collective we the people. The alternative is decolonization. Tuck and Yang, 2012. Reconciliation is about rescuing a settler normalcy, restoring a settler future. Reconciliation is concerned with questions of what will decolonization look like. Incommensurability acknowledges that these questions not be answered. Decolonization is not obliged to answer. Decolonization is not accountable to settlers or settler futurity. Decolonization is accountable to indigenous sovereignty and futurity. To fully enact the ethic of incommensurability means relinquishing settler futurity, abandoning the hopes settlers may one day be commensurable to native peoples. The native futures to be lived once in a settler nation gone are the unburdened possibilities that made possible by the ethic of incommensurability. Decolonization offers a different perspective to human and civil rights-based approaches to justice. Next, U.S. population is declining now. Maintaining current rates is key to environmental sustainability. Rubenstein, 17. The cheapest generation of Americans have fewer children than prior generations. Long-lasting economic and demographic trends has fundamentally changed the game for millennials. The largest generation of Americans may never have as many children or spend as lavishly. Population consumption is a perfect storm and should continue a sustainable U.S. economy in which the utilization of scarce resources equals the ability of our ecosystem to replenish those resources will be attainable. Ecologists have long perceived both procreation and economic growth as threats to the environment, exacerbating global warming and straining resources such as clean water and food. Population growth has been an unrelenting driver of environmental degradation. Increased immigration causes exponential growth. Gafario 15. Projections show the U.S. has a clear path to population stabilization. They show that recent comprehensive immigration reform proposals have the potential to drive U.S. population growth even higher, potentially more than doubling our population by the end of this century. The two mass immigration scenarios commit the U.S. to continued rapid population increase. Increase will total hundreds of millions of people, more people within the next 2 or 3 generations. And increased U.S. population specifically drains water resources, collapses U.S. ag supply that is key to meet growing international demand. And that's wedge 15. Water is essential to all life. The U.S. uses prodigious volumes in agriculture. Protecting water is as important in managing and conserving water quantity. Water resources in America are already stressed, and population growth will stress them further. Water demands of a growing population. We are reducing our ability to feed that population and overseas population that depend on our food exports. Next, nukes. Hartley 12. Food insecurity can be the cause of war. Conflicts in the next century will likely be fought over lack of resources. The scale of the problem in the future could be significantly greater as a result of population pressures. If large regions of the world run short by food or water, bloody wars are liable to follow. Increasingly incredible scenario for World War III is a festering, self-perpetuating chain of resource conflicts and nuclear war. Next on case. The plan underestimates the degree to which Trump can use his executive power to post fiat to circumvent the plan despite a fiat reduction and legal restrictions. Matthew 16. Trump is not the typical Republican on immigration. He's laid out a plan to deport millions and restrict legal migration. Trump cannot enact his entire immigration by fiat. He needs Congress for a wall, but experts say he could do an alarming amount to clog the legal immigration process without changing any laws or needing Congress. Trump could not have more luck restricting legal immigration. For example, moratorium on green cards. Trump could clog up the works and slow or outright freeze the green card issuance. He could severely reduce legal immigration altogether if he wanted to, keeping hundreds and thousands of people out of the U.S. every year. Would involve not issuing green cards, visas. The president could do that. Trump could do that and make life harder for illegal immigrants all by himself. Next, turn. Travel ban has caused a reverse brain drain back to Iran. Solves Iran's democracy and economy. Ibet 17. The trajectory on which Trump hopes to set the U.S. will make an uninviting for Muslims and immigrants. The loss of Muslim immigrants to the U.S. could be a boon for the other countries or regions. A renaissance in the Middle East may yet be a result of banning Muslims from the U.S. The brain drain would be stemmed. Iranians would be forced home, turning their finest minds to solving the enormous domestic, social, economic, and political changes. The ban will be a straw that breaks the camel's back, forcing a creative solution out of the necessary to survive. Change requires a catalyst, and this could be the first step on that road. That results in a Middle East renaissance. Next, travel ban is just a drop in the sea of hoops Iranian scientists have to jump through to get U.S. visas that have existed long before Trump took office. Cartier 17. Even before Trump, troubles with the U.S. travel policies have been having a dampening effect on ability for some to conduct science overseas trips, fields, research, academic, and workshops. At workshops.
And
In the Cartier 17.
That's fine. Or workshops.
And we can market at workshops.
Yeah.
So is the plan a logical consequence of the alt?
You rephrase the question?
Like, can the plan happen, like, inside of the alt?
No.
Okay, so no floating pit. Next, you say that settler colonialism is a structure of permanent invasion, but you also frame it as a way of taking native lands. How is the immigration policy that we're doing in continuing that?
I mean, I'm sure we'll explain more on this in the block, but the notion of immigration reform, specifically doing things like making court rulings and bringing in immigrants, all reinforces the idea that the U.S. has the sovereign right to bring in people and that they were here
Okay.
originally.
And in your alternative, what does decolonization look like in the role of the alt?
Okay, so a couple things here. First is the alt will be decolonization of scholarship, wherein scholarship like recognizes and decolonizes. Second, it'll like be a structure of like physical decolonization leading to the point where we ultimately return to a pre-colonial world.
What do you mean by physical decolonization to pre-colonial world? Do we return the land back to the natives or Native Americans?
Yes.
Or native? Wait, so all of the land is returned to the Native Americans?
So the alt is twofold. It's decolonization of scholarship and like decolonization of the mind, like recognizing these ideas, rejecting those against it, and then also like involving a structure of physical decolonization.
So is there a physical agent that's going to control people to get out of the native land?
No, like we'd say we don't have to enforce. Like we'd say that people can stay if they want to. They can leave if
Wait,
they want to.
how-
We don't have to
how-
defend what
how-
happened post
how-
all. We just have to defend it's a good idea.
You just have to defend the alt as a good idea? Okay. Next, in your evidence, in your Tuck and Yang 2012, it says incommensurability acknowledges that these questions need not be answered for decolonization to exist as a framework. So, like, why do we not have to answer the questions, what will be the consequences for the settler, and what would decolonization look like?
Okay, so what Tuck and Yang are getting to there is the idea that the very asking of these questions are wrapped up in the notion of settler colonialism and are in essence settler moves to innocence, questioning the system in defense of themselves as a way to prevent recognizing that there was anything wrong with the settler
Okay.
state to begin with.
What are all the links to the plan? Could you specify all of them
For the K or
Yeah.
for like,
for the critique?
so for the K there are a bunch like immigration reform, the sentiment that we are all immigrants, characterizing the U.S. as a benign entity, erasing its history, a bunch of, to name a few. There are probably more I'll get into in the block, but like those are to name a few.
Okay.
So first, let's start off with case extension by 18. The warrants that the court ruling enshrines First Amendment protections, along with extending Lurie 18 and her warrants that the court ruling results in complete elimination of the ban, combined to set a precedent that prevents Trump circumvention along with durable fiat. Let's move on to the DA. They don't specify a brink in the amount of immigrants that come, so the EV is contextualized as mass immigration, but we don't know how many immigrants it would take to trigger the internal link story or the impact. And it's not unique. The evidence was written before the travel ban was even made, so those immigrants are probably presumed within the study, and that means that we can just disregard the DA to begin with because those immigrants were probably accounted for. So let's move on to the K. First, the role of the ballot is to weigh the consequences of the plan against a competitive alternative option. Prefer it. Fairness. The negative framework argument is deployed to avoid clash with the 1AC. Specifically, forefronting debates over immigration policy is key. Rennick 17. Dems have few clear ideas of reform. The left has no idea how much immigration is desirable or how it ought to be regulated. We can't arrive at a more open immigration system overnight. Fiddly legislative fixes or legal changes. They might slightly ensure that people who are eligible for immigration relief aren't barred from getting it. Asylum law can make a huge difference. Nearly 1 in 5 failed. There are numerous other boring, wonkish policy changes that could be slipped into larger bills with comparatively little fanfare. Facts that immigrants have no access to legal representation is not known among liberals. If we can secure mandatory lawyers, number of bills before Congress, Democratic Party needs to start publicizing this is a major problem. And the AFF outweighs. Institutional engagement is offense for us and net benefits to a perm. Political nihilism spreads beyond the classroom and empowers Trumps of the world. Optimism is good. We need intellectual pragmatism. They don't equip students with the skills necessary to contest institutionally created harms. Turns any alt solvency. Seeing like the state is inevitable. Rejecting it renders any change impossible. Their model eliminates public works. Without literature to weigh against totalizing theories like the alt, it hurts research-based education. That means the alt is utopian. Vote for education and fairness. And next, there's a DA to the alt. Slippery slope DA. The alt turns into a rejection of all politics, which does nothing and merely replicates institutional violence. Milks Zucker 15. They assert politics stems from a rejection of politics. The politics they promise is premised entirely on subjectivity as free self-expression in order to fill its promise. Such alternatives must avoid concrete claims. This breeds such judgments are symptomatic of arrogance. The intellectual practices are the same kind of domination. They simply reject institutions and the notion of imminence that neo-anarchism is anti-political. They draw debate extreme height specific evidence or entirely unsubstantiated categories. Establishing ends requires implementing a program evaluating desirability. Such a politics is not a solution in quality or denomination, does not reinvigorate. It is symptomatic of the very malice of neoliberalism. There is nothing emancipatory about the retreat toward neo-anarchist valorized politics of helplessness. And Lincoln, the alt destroys settler binaries by removing Islamophobia from the immigration system. And law is good. The law is irredeemably anti-indigenous. Institutions can be strategically redeployed to empower indigenous communities. This proves in turn their sweeping critiques of settler colonialism. This proves inaccessibility. Buchanan, Darian Smith 11. While law has long been played a role in perpetuating hierarchies between colonizers and colonized, as asymmetry of power is increasingly being challenged by native peoples who are employing laws attack of empowerment. Increasingly, indigenous groups are making claims under Western law. Legal pluralism makes assumptions about the totality of the colonial process untenable. It reflects an increasing prominence of native issues within public institutions. We've discovered looking ways in which indigenous groups actively initiate and shape legal engagements and political change. And colonialism is not ontological, fails to explain violence. Focus on the nation state's policies is more productive. Ribeiro 11. We cannot think of the structural power of colonialism as a lasting force that always overruns others. We cannot diffuse the power of nation states. Colonialism cannot become an interpretive panacea. Overemphasis on colonialism can curiously regenerate precisely what needs to be criticized and surpassed. My argument calls for a sharper consideration of the causal hierarchies among colonialism, other historical processes, and concrete scenarios. By transforming colonialism into the primordial focus of analysis of the underlying importance of nation states, and at least as well to deviate from understanding particular power relations between nation states. And next, the alt is the wrong starting point. Roller 13. Decolonization dialogue is a preemptive strike against indigenous research and one that allows settlers to renounce any agency or responsibility to challenge colonialism on their own terms. Respecting and promoting indigenous nation on the other and entails confronting colonial institutions with their greatest fear, the fear of science. Response to the needs of difficult questions are committed with the science that follows. Whereas the science experienced by settlers can be neither the audience nor the arbiter of indigenous being. And framing settler colonialism through a totalizing lens of absolute decolonization makes indigenous liberation impossible by setting the terms of victory as all or nothing. Pessimism actively reifies settler dominance. Buzzridge 18. There's a deficit into imagining settler decolonization. The structural perspective closes down possibilities of political transformation. There's tautological discrepancy where the only solution to settler colonialism is decolonization, which renders impossible in seeking to elucidate the logic of eliminations the overarching force. There's an operational weakness whereby logic is omnipresent even when it appears not to be. Settler colonialism has one story, either total victory or total failure. The distinction observes the possibility of a genuinely decolonized relationship necessary to guard against the logic of elimination. Anti-colonial struggle must aim to get the settler-indigenous relationship going. The fatalism reapplying settler colonialism as a metastructure where colonial relations of domination are inevitable. Ontology race agency, but puts politics to death. Totalizing logic of invasion rests on the disciplining gesture where any discussion is assimilationist. Any attempt to explore colonial subjectivity would entail working beyond the bounds of absolute polarity. Is discipline is complicit, disallows the possibility of counter-republics, and alliances but comes close to resistance as acquiescence. And opposition is not decolonization. And modern movements inevitably fail, only moving toward the political, consisting and shifting who holds power. White 16. Contemporary protest has broken the tactics of getting people into the streets does not result in social change. Representatives no longer compelled to heed protests. The proliferation of inaccurate protests activists will not bring an end to terminal other trends with sovereign power. Only two ways to achieve sovereignty: elections or wars. A dangerous misguided strategy. Most use techniques to dominate elections. Process remain ineffective as long as there is no party capable of governing. And empirics prove the state is inevitable. Rundle Hakambe 07. Bosnia, Somalia, and Afghanistan in the 1990s is the best real example of places without a central government. Despite the absence of government, they fell short of the ideals of anarcho-capitalism. In all cases, central government is displaced in the vacuum of power is rapidly filled by new bands of thugs that establish themselves in governments. It seems to have one government rapidly these thugs are replaced with another. Every place in the world is governed by government. And the discourse is parasitic on any chance of resistance turns to alt. President 16. To mention decolonization addressing settlers exciting means that has already failed. Even when settlers do engage in unsettling settler colonialism, it cannot be for their own instrumental ends. Settlers' engagement with decolonization can have it as a predetermined goal to attain. And perm. Do the plan in the alt and every other non-mutually exclusive instance. And the big thing with that is that it's going to avoid any sort of severance perm they might come up here and try to make, because we can first solve for the travel ban and Islamophobic impacts that it creates, and then for the alt. And epistemology doesn't come first. Epistemic focus prevents pragmatic, political, and ethical action. It's a poor way to frame and address real-world problems. I went to. Well, ontological or epistemological sophistication is one kind of critical judgment. It's not the most important kind. Prioritization of ontology and epistemology promotes a theory-driven rather than problem-driven approach. This strategy easily slips in promotion of the pursuit of generality over that of validity. And reject their epistemology. The cards aren't contextual to debate. Ritter 13. Philosophers and rhetorical theorists have never written using competitive debates. An example, none of them have ever incited a debate around those who attempt to apply academic theories to decontextualize the broader theories without accounting for the competitive structures. And just for an overview of the app, you need to be extending our Islam 627 card. That card's going to talk about the globalized cycle of violence in the name of security discourse. ASC and NEG 18 are respectively going to talk about the feeling of violence and the feeling of racism in the former and latter. And you need to be extending those and weighing those against the K, because those are going to talk about the impacts of Islamophobia upon the greater part of society. And I'm open for cross-examination.
So first, what does perm look like?
The perm is us first getting rid of the travel ban through the Supreme Court, and then in the world of the app that breaks down Islamophobic structures, and then we would do the alt. So then we engage in the world of the alt, and it breaks down other structures as well, so it solves best.
Oh, okay. What happens post-plan to stop Trump's circumvention attempts?
That's our Shabaya 18 and Lurie 18 cards, and a bit of our Kagan 15 cards as well. A lot of that talks about how once we enshrine these First Amendment protections and set this precedent, it's going to prevent Trump from being able to go back and reinstate these.
I'm sorry, can you repeat what? Stopping him from reinstating it?
It'll be legal precedent.
Okay. How many immigrants will come after the removal of the
have no way to know that, but your entire population DA, its uniqueness was written before the travel ban was instated, so it'll probably be fine.
Oh yeah, so I have a question about that. So how does it not unique if it's in the context of how population trends are moving?
Because it was written before the travel ban, so it would have assumed population at that time, and so it wouldn't be any different than in the world after the plan is passed.
Okay.
Okay.
So I have another question then. What about colonialism is not ontological or ontological?
It fails to explain violence because you need to focus on the nation state's policies to be more productive and to actually engage in ways to solve these, because you can't explain the violence that you claim to understand through settler colonialism.
I don't think I have any questions.
I have one more. What specifically about immigration policy is key?
What do you mean?
So you got a framing card like immigration policy is key. What specifically about that is key?
one by destroying what is already there, immigration a gross picture for an exercise that entailed to the genocide of indigenous people. On to framework. Cases are a valuable part of debate. They encourage social awareness and serve as a way to keep ethics and government policy discussion, something which is definitely needed. A value that they capable of considering the AFF because the AFF is furthering the ethical and injustice of settler colonialism, which must be addressed first. All their arguments are about immigration policy specifically in the key. Settler colonialism is specifically linked to immigration policy, so we meet this framing. Then, impact framing. The key outweighs in terms of the AFF because the abusive narrative of the U.S. government not only covers up its genocide of natives, but also a way to cover things like the violence committed against Muslims and domestic abuse. The alt will be creating a new world where just narratives are conveyed to the populace and the unjust border system will be gone. The impact of structural violence. Native Americans have been marginalized since the beginning of colonialism and continue to be used as test subjects and then ignored by the government. There's always the AFF significantly for multiple reasons. Its ongoing impact, which has the magnitude of genocide. On the line violent proper, they talk about how colonialism is non-ontological because we don't explain how violence, but extend the Glenn evidence here. The case does explain the violence, specifically how Native people have been assimilated and erased since the beginning of settlers arriving and are to this day. Then they say the AFF decreases settler colonial binaries by removing Islamophobia, but colonialism is intrinsic to Middle East countries. The AFF alone can't possibly solve only decolonization. You can apply the Carter evidence from Solvency from the 1 and C here, talking about how there are all these historical things even before the travel ban about how Middle East nations and then other nations in the travel ban have been settled. The alt approach alone would not be able to solve. Only by decolonization can we actually address those structural problems. Then they talked about the law is good, but the law right now is awful. Our Glenn evidence indicates, and the Patel evidence indicate why in the status quo it's off, like it's structurally biased against Native Americans. Then they talk about how epistemology is not first and reject epistemology, but the K logic needs to come first because of all the violence that's been committed against Native Americans. Then they said on the alt level, the alt-sovereign movement, the patriarchal structure of power that's creating the false narrative. This changes the power structure by returning to a pre-colonial world which is free from discriminatory narratives. The alt also solves the case because removing the patriarchal structure of government, the narrative of domestic abuse and the violence against Muslims will be allowed to take a center stage that effectively provides the opportunity to address it. Extend the Tuck and Yang 12 evidence, which says we must decolonize by ridding ourselves of the oppressive view of the G and allow Native Americans to reclaim their land, as well as reject the AFF scholarship. They never responded to the reject the AFF scholarship part of the alt. Then, they said we have the wrong starting point, but we have the exactly right starting point. The Tuck and Yang evidence is very clear that we need to do both. Reject scholarship and set the structure to physically colonize. Then they talked about utopian voting issues. Two responses. First of all, at worst, reject the argument, not the team. Second, utopian alts are probably a really good idea. We have to have the best, we have to debate about what the best lens for looking at and improving the world should be. Then they talk about rejection of policies. But you should extend the Tuck and Yang specifically evidence here because we need to reject certain policies like the scholarship of the AFF because those things have bias against Native Americans. Since they're evidence doesn't contextualize and isn't decolonized, it doesn't meet our framing, and the perm can't solve either. Then, they talk about the lens of absolute decolonization is bad. Two responses here. One, the Tuck and Yang evidence should really be preferred because it talks about, for two reasons. First of all, because it specifically talks about how, like, the structure would go down. Second, because it's actually by an indigenous scholar. Their scholar is just someone looking in from the outside. That's the definition of a settler move to innocence, saying, oh, we can't possibly do this, and just coming up with excuses and distractions. Then, group their empirics proven modern move. The alt definitely solves the Tuck and Yang evidence is very clear, both in, like, rejecting scholarship and setting the structure of decolonization. Lastly, they talk about this parasitic discourse, but this discourse in this round is really good because it's helping reflect and express all the problems that are happening with Native Americans, and we are the ones introducing it, meaning we're the only ones that meet the K framework. Let's move on to the dissad. They only had two responses here coming out of the 2IC. The first is it's non-unique, but this is an awful argument. Extend the Ruberstein evidence. It specifically is in the context of how population trends are functioning right now in the United States. How millennials are having less and less kids, and the numbers of the only reason population is increasing is from immigration. Second, they said no specific number, but extend the Cafaro evidence, that immigration increases population growth because immigration populations are the ones majority having kids. And immigration causes rapid population growth. Without it, the EU stays below replacement level. McAlkin 14. There are two dynamics that fuel population growth for during immigration levels. Regions have acted the highest level of immigration for rapid population growth. Immigration will essentially become the only driver of future population growth, continuing trend that will have dire consequences to our environment, with the country already facing difficulty in preventing water shares and the destruction of irreplaceable habits, and the belief the U.S. will be able to circumvent these problems near twice its current population size. And each 500,000 immigrants led in by the plan are 72 million in the future. Cafaro 15. Current U.S. population growth is largely driven by immigration. Each additional 500,000 annual immigration will add 72 million people to America's population. Immigration policy will thus determine whether America's population stabilizes or continue to grow to the current stage, helping to determine what the next several generations of American environmentalists will be able to accomplish. Then you can extend the uncontested internal link card. the Kowinski 15 evidence, and the new card. This is important because not only will it outweigh the AFF, and I'll get into that on framing, it also turns the AFF because of water resources and ag declines. It'll mean the Trump administration will have more incentive to put pressure and find a scapegoat, which they will historically have proven and will choose Islamic populations. The dissent outweighs. Don't allow them to do any new answers because it's really abusive and we'd only have one more speech to answer it. Hold them to the two AC answers. They really undercovered it. Hold them to them. On to framing. Prefer worst case thinking. Even though the risk might be low, the magnitude should still be evaluated. Argument 15. Arguments can be made to exclude worst case scenarios if everyone has to wonder how much error is introduced by their exclusion. If they're relatively small, it might not matter, but if larger, then excluding them is a bad idea. Consider the list of billion-dollar weather disasters in the United States. There are 146 events on those lists that total cost of 1,015 billion. Exclude the top few events are of great importance to our risk analysis. You weather disasters, and that is the distribution has what is called a fat alongside this type of distribution has a very large number of relatively small events with very large one. Few large one. This is important implication for disaster risk analysis. Disaster data tends to have followed the extreme events in the tail distribution. The worst case should be included in risk analysis. And extinction first. Existential risks require unique calculus. Boston 13. Human extinction risks are poorly understood and severely underestimated by privacy. Existential risk mitigation may be effective, a dominant more priority alleviation of present sufficiency of a more living accounts. Future people are worth of the bunch of present people. Human life is the human life. If you have the more point of view, the human generation matter in proportion of the population type, you have to get this very certain that existential mitigation has a higher quality than pretty much anything else you can do. There are so many people that come into existence in the future. If you manage to survive the good of your time, we live for billions of years, or to might colonize billions of solar systems, billions of millions of time more people than currently exist. Therefore, even a small reduction in the probability within this enormous good would outweigh enormous benefits like eliminating poverty or current malaria. They didn't extend framing come out of the 2AC, so we're the only ones with answers on this. The dissad is the only thing that meets that framing.
Let's start at the top with the settler colonialism. How does it reinforce imperialism?
Yeah, so it reinforces imperialism and like U.S. hegemony by establishing that the U.S. has like the sovereign right to control its borders, control who comes in and out, and like able to regulate immigration in the ways the AFF is doing.
And how is the AFF doing that?
Like the way you're allowed, like deciding whether or not people can come in, everything about the AFF and like ruling in the courts and the way the U.S. is functioning all are like reinforcing the notion that the U.S. has like a right to be here, which the K would contend they don't, that they're on stolen land.
And why does debate need critiques in your framework?
Specifically, why does debate need critiques? Or why does debate need the critique we're running? Like generically, we would say Ks are really good at identifying structural problems that exist in the world and exposing them in an area where they can be discussed and analyzed in ways that promote ideas, and that then those ideas are reflected in wins and losses about what is being viewed and how those opinions are being conveyed, which also like spills over to solving things like structurally and saying like the debate community rejects these certain kinds of ideas because these problems have been outlined in critiques.
So how does that have any real world impact in that sense?
I mean, it sets the precedent, like the debate community respects these, like in the context of the Sekal K, it'd be like the debate community and the judges in this room recognize that there are problems in the status quo with the way the U.S. government is colonial, and those need to be rejected.
What is incommensurable?
It is the notion that like there could be multiple ways and that certain things can be done like at the same time. It's all about wrapped up in your perm, and incommensurability is talking about we can't have both those things, that we can't do multiple lenses, we have to decolonize first.
So let's talk about that. On regards of your argument that our authors are someone peering in and saying we can't do that, it's wrong, that it's like that reaffirmation of innocence of the settler, are you not doing that by presenting this K without being one of the oppressed, in theory?
No, so like, and Tuck and Yang talk about this in their book as well, about the notion that since the settlers are the ones that put the oppression in place, they also need to be the ones, along with like indigenous people, to help also reject it at the same time.
So
And
do we
can
not
read cards
reject
about that
parts
if you want.
of that by getting rid of the travel ban?
I mean, all our arguments about the perm still apply, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. And on the utopian argument, why is utopian fiat even good? Like,
Because like in the context of debate space, we should be and this means you're like
policy framing too. We should be analyzing what like the best possible world could look like,
So how
even
does
if that's a utopia already. You ready? 5 more minutes. Okay. Those people. Yeah. Where's the
I know, but I'm pretty sure it's people. Can we have our flash drive?
Yep, I just did that. Yeah. Y'all get it.
So for an off-time roadmap, I'm going to be doing solvency and then on discrimination. Does everyone have the email? Is everybody ready? Okay. First, on solvency. For what we said about Trump will circumvent post plan. There is no answer in the 2AC. Trump will circumvent. You can vote neg on presumption. And then travel ban caused RV bad and solves Iran democracy. This was also dropped. Our turn Iranian dim solves for discrimination by upping rights in Iran. I ran that in my first speech. Now I'm going to read a few solvency cards. Okay. Trump circumvents the ruling, has a strict definition on bona fide ties, some in 17. The Trump administration issued guidelines implementing those parts of the travel ban that now views as permissible. The most egregious part of the administration's new policy is its absurdly narrow definition of what counts as a family relationship close enough to qualify as a bona fide tie to the United States. Sorry, bona fide. The Supreme Court emphasized that it is the only lifting the lower court injunctions with respect to foreign nationals abroad who have no connection to the U.S. at all. The administration's failure to recognize this reeks of either incompetence or blatant bad faith. The same standards apply to refugees as to would-be entrants covered by the travel ban targeting the Six Nations. Next, governors can make it difficult for Syrian refugees to enter
Let's skip that part.
Okay. Plan will be circumvented. USCIS deny visas over paperwork errors, creating invisible wall for all immigration. It's around September 11th this year. Trump cut down on legal pathways to immigrate a new policy, allowing officers to outright deny any visa or green card application that contains an error. Immigration lawyers worry that there is not enough oversight or standards. Many responses cited technicalities. One was rejected because it did not have a table of contents. Lawyers called this minefield of onerous paperwork an invisible wall, designed to make legal immigration as difficult as possible. Under Trump, the extra layer of questions has been applied to all types of visas, green cards, and humanitarian cases. Even when cases are ultimately approved, Peace says employers have told her they will reconsider going through the process again. Workers stuck in limbo have told her they're considering other options too. Again, more evidence of why it will get circumvented after it's passed. They're going to reconsider it. They are going to go through it again, and this time they will not pass it. ICE circumvents and mistreats migrants because agents face no consequences for violating rights. Again, Serrana 18. Accusation of racial profiling abound committed by cops and ICE. The officer has always had some other reason on why he stopped her client and no one else. One of those reasons could legitimately be Mexican appearance, thanks to the Supreme Court ruling in 1975. Cut the next card. I'm going to be going to discriminate, or actually, never mind. I'm going to say that one. Okay, ICE circumvents, ignores the law, imprisons immigrants of all types to send a discouraging message to documented and undocumented migrants. 1018. Thousands of asylum seekers are being held in jails. The plaintiffs are fleeing persecution. They all followed procedure and presented themselves at the border to apply for asylum, were screened for a government official, and found a credible asylum claim instead of offering a humane response. The Trump administration will lock them up indefinitely. The arbitrary imprisonment of people is part of the administration's larger strategy for deterring immigrants from seeking refuge in the U.S. The administration's detention of asylum seekers is cruel and wasteful. It violates the Constitution, breaks U.S. immigration laws, international law, and goes into written policy. Now on discrimination.
Before you do that, don't give them any new extensions or answers.
Don't give them any new extensions or answers.
Hold them in the 2AC answers.
Hold them to the 2AC answers that they have given them. Don't let them go
best for fairness and mutes the
because
law.
that is best for fairness and mutes the law. Next on discrimination. Travel ban is not based on grounds, religion/race. Numerous factors prove. Robert 17. The proclamation is expressly premised on legitimate purposes and says nothing about religion. The entry restrictions on Muslim majority nations are limited to countries that were previously designated by Congress or prior administrations as posing national security risks. Or proclamation flex. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, 49 seconds.
Well, what happens is this guy counts as zero after like 30 seconds. There you go.
I literally just they responded with, y'all on balance. So
There are any new cards?
The order's gonna go solvency, framing, the advantage, the DA, the critique.
Group the circumvention arguments together. The Shabaya 18 is uber good evidence about how it's saying that the plan spills over to broader, sets a precedent to prevent broader anti-Muslim discrimination, and the circumvention arguments will still be reviewed under the Supreme Court because their evidence is still talking about the circumvention is necessary as national security, and their circumvention arguments is as violations of ICE that can still be reviewed and solved under the Supreme Court. And next, on the advantage, onto framing, their only argument is that worst case thinking is the best and that extinction is the best risk count. But their evidence literally uses security discourse. Extensive 627 evidence that says security discourse is the key reason that justifies national security exceptionalism and justifies globalized violence. They claim that my partner didn't extend any of our case, but my partner extended our case on the flow. He mentioned about Islam 627. He extended all the warrants from our 1AC, even if they weren't specifically mentioned with the authors. Next on to, we saw at least one instance of discrimination. So if we can prove that they have no impact, which was conceded in the 1AC, our entire advantage in solvency was conceded in the 1AC. So if we can prove that the impacts of the K is non-existent, or we impact the turn of the K, we should be able to win the round because we're net better than the status quo with the advantage. Next on to Dissad. They fundamentally just ignore. They don't clash with our argument that their evidence was written pre-travel ban and assumes all the immigration happening at that time. Their only claim is that trends off their uniqueness evidence is just trends off of immigration. Yeah, they are trends off of immigration at that time, which was pre-travel ban. So and they don't clash with that argument, and that means they don't get access to their entire internal link scenario. And which means they don't get access to their nuclear scenario. Onto the critique. Next, they can see my partner's framework that we have to extend our partner's framework that we have to weigh the consequences of the plan versus the alt. First, it's key to fairness and clash. Their only argument here is that we have to focus on the bias against Native Americans, but you can extend our out of round impacts about how it moots the entire 1AC of offense, and also secondly ignores the bias that is felt against Muslim discrimination, and third of all, specifically extend our key 70 evidence that we need forefront debate to make actual policy over immigration, and that the discourse is key. And next, they claim that the perm is a move of settler innocence, but our original settlers are dead. Why should we suffer from the consequences from our ancestor? That like we are new lives, and they don't have evidence that we create violence through the affirmative plan. Their only link is contextualized to legal immigration as a whole, which was also contextualized as past histories of legal immigration as a purpose of expanding colonialism. That's not what today's immigration society is, because our land is able to, because our evidence is saying that we only need to weigh the net violence of the app, and the net violence of the app has no historical, letting in Muslim discrimination has no historical roots in colonialism, and their argument that they're trying to weigh all the historical violence of all of the United States federal policies is infinitely regressive, because it forces me to infinitely defend every single thing the United States federal government has ever done. That is impossible to debate as the negative, and the all is super uber vague. First of all, nowhere in the all does it say that we should return. Nowhere in the all does it say that first physical there will be a physical change, physical decolonization. Also, the all doesn't say mental decolonization. All the all evidence ever says is incommensurability, which means that they can't reconcile the two together. The all has no action that it's taking, even if you think it's a mental, you can't grant them their physical decolonization, which means they don't give the native lands back, which inherently turns the entire critique, because that would still irrelevantly means that the natives still won't get any of their land. And on utopia and fiat, they justify it by saying that it's good for debate, but it's bad for three reasons. First, education. Our education is severely hindered by them not making a blanket claim that the all works, and that it just does. That kills education, because that's not a real world claim, nor is it logical, because we can't clash with it, and we can't have actual real world evidence if we don't have anything that, if we just have to talk about revolutions all the time without an agent. Fairness explodes calculus because it attempts to take out all the DAs to the all. Also, they drop that the all is inevitable, and they drop that the all is a rejection of all politics. This is important because it means it leads to anti-intellectualism, which means that their all doesn't solve. And yeah.
critique the dissad, framing, and solvency. Anyone not ready? No? Alright. First on the critique, we're concede the alt doesn't solve. We're gonna kick this. On the offense, on the flow. Their first thing is like their interpretation is key to fairness, but kicking solves any risk of this. Their only impacts on this were like moots the 1AC. This is completely false. They knew the K was coming. We disclosed before the round, and they talked about we need to have actual like in-round debates about immigration. The debate is been centered on immigration with our circumvention and dissent arguments. Then, looking down the flow, on the link level, they conceded that colonialism is intrinsic to Middle East countries and the AFF alone can't solve. I want you to extend that through as a conceded solvency deficit. Just because the alt doesn't solve that too, doesn't mean it's not a solvency deficit, which will go into presumption framing. I'll explain more on solvency. Then they said it's infinitely regressive. No, we were only asking them to defend the US and G as far as is colonialism, and we're kicking it, which mutes that anyway. Then they said utopian fiat's bad. No, reject the argument, not the team, and the education is best if we're talking about the best possible worlds. Then they said the alt is vague, but the alt was very specific. We laid out the two things the Tucking Yang evidence like talked about decolonization would look like. Lastly, I mean, if it's close, reject the argument, not the team. Don't give them new theory analysis or change your opinion because we don't get a speech after this. On the dissent. There is literally no way you can look me in the face at the end of the round and tell me you didn't vote negative on the dissent. When coming out of the 2AC, there are only two answers, and then in the 1AR, they just repeat those answers and don't respond anything to the warrants I extended. First is the Rubinstein evidence, which is super good. They say this was pre-travel ban and like act like that should answer it completely. That is definitely not true. Just because it's pre-travel ban does not negate the statistics of what it's talking about how millennials are having less kids and immigrants are the only ones having kids. Then, they didn't even extend their no specific number, meaning they have a dropped link. We have three pieces of evidence I want you to extend here. First is the two pieces of Cavero evidence, which are really, really good. Specifically the one I read in the block, talking about how even if the AF only, in the course of all of its time in the travel ban, only brings out 500,000 immigrants, that is 72 million immigrants in the future, which substantially links into the other things. Then the Alpin evidence is super good, and it talks about how immigration increases population growth, both by having more people come in, but that also that immigrants are the ones that are having more kids, meaning they're increasing the population over time. Literally the only argument they had here was that it's not unique because it's pre-travel ban. That shouldn't count. If it comes down to it, read the Rubinstein evidence. It's very good about how the trends are cavity. Just because it's pre-travel ban doesn't negate the fact that this is how the trends are going. And if anything, like, yeah, and don't give them new answers, literally. Then, on the impact analysis, they literally have conceded the internal link and impact of this dissent, meaning you can extend them through. They have 100% probability and 100% magnitude. The Harley evidence and the Kowinski evidence are super good on how increased population strains will decrease water resources in the U.S., which spills over because of how they infect the ag industry. The U.S. ag is key to the rest of the world's economy for a number of reasons. First of all, is U.S. agricultural supplies are essential to other nations, both having enough food and being able to like function as governments from lack of food, which has a couple implications. First, if there's not enough food in there, that will increase instability in those countries, making it more likely that those countries will go to conflict, which is one of the links the Hartley evidence talks about. Second is that in the context of the U.S. specifically, water shortages will make them more likely to seek to divert conflict to other places to specifically with Trump, to try to divert attention from all the pressure from the lack of water shortages. This causes the nuclear scenarios that the Hartley evidence talks about, which have 100% magnitude. Nuclear war does cause extinction, making the risk infinite. Lastly, this impact totally wins on time frame because nuclear strikes occur very, very quickly. And they dropped the turns case analysis in the 1AR, talking about how when there are decrease in water shortages, or when there are water shortages, it'll mean Trump will try to find scapegoats inside of the country as well as diverting attention. And those scopes will not only be Muslims in the U.S., but also Muslim countries around. You literally cannot vote negative, or not vote anything but negative on the dissent when they only have two answers in the 2AC. Don't give them new answers. This dissent totally outweighs all I have to what is framing. Let's go to framing now. Literally the only thing they extend coming out, well, first of all, they didn't extend anything in the 2AC, so you're trying to give them this analysis. Second, even if you do, all their stuff talking about is security discourse, and that intensifies global violence. This is not definitely not true. You should prefer our analysis with the Erquin evidence and the Bostrom evidence, talking about extinction needs to come first for a number of reasons. First of all is that even if you want to give them, there's some risk of structural impacts. We've proven the disside turns, and extinction needs to be addressed first, otherwise we won't be able to solve for structural violence impacts. Second, all this stuff about global violence isn't actually what's happening. When there have been countries that are proposing security challenges, they always go to as policymakers, they always go to solve what is the greatest impact first, and the violence gets actually solved therefore because we're removing the structure that would kill literally everyone on solvency. All they extended here was Shabbat Sol's circumvention. That is not significant. We have 5 to 6 different cards that say they will get circumvention, specifically in the lens of how Trump and other actors can circumvent. It's an easy way for presumption if you're looking for an out. And also, if you really need an easy way out, they literally drop the turn that that solves for Iranian democracy. Easy make valid.
40 minutes. It's going to go case in the order of solvency. Islamophobia, framing, and then it's going to go off case with offense on the K, and then the DA. Okay, so let's start off with solvency. A lot of their argument has been circumvention, but Trump gets no power over the Supreme Court. That is just basic checks and balance functioning. That's not a new argument. That's just quite literally how it works. So don't give them any of that circumvention argument. That's not how that's going to work. And let's move on to discrimination / Islamophobia. Our impacts are going to outweigh the DA. That culture of fear in Islam 627 is a globalized pretext for violence and sacrifice in the name of security discourse. And our Nominal 18 and ASE 18 cards, which fuel racism and violence, respectively, creates a cycle that's just going to keep getting worse that allows for quite literally an infinite level of magnitude. Let's move on to framing. They keep saying that you need to prefer extinction first, but that is exactly the security discourse we are talking about when people want to argue against Islamophobia. And when you look at this, look at cards from the one you say like Memi 2K that challenging racism is a prior ethical question. Look at Parker 14. These arguments are literally just works to keep the current order entrenched. And look at Jackson 12. This is an argument of fear politics, and that just impacts out to keep Islamophobia in place, as well as other systems of oppression. And that's why you should not prefer extinction level impacts and need to disregard the impacts on the DA. And extinction shouldn't be addressed first. It's just a bad way of evaluating life, because now it's more so about this grotesque scale of how many people live compared to how life is in the world of the plant. And let's move on to the set call flow. They've made a few key mistakes. They never really answered my partner's argument that the alt's vagueness is bad. The alt's vagueness plays into effects on how this round played out. And in arguments of utopian fiat, they tried to say, reject the argument, not the team. But they come in here and skew the round by saying that we don't get to argue the world of the alt because it ends up quite literally perfect. This utopian fiat has to be rejected, and you need to reject them and not just the argument for it, because otherwise they are going to come into every next round and do it again. And on political nihilism, that is an argument that they also didn't even answer or bother with answering. And institutional engagement is the only way to actually create change. So that just reaffirms our solvency. Let's move on to the DA flow. So they're saying that immigration explodes, but here's the thing. In that McAlpin 14 card they read, it says current immigration levels cast a long shadow on the United States' future as population growth projects for the year 2100 predict the U.S. population will hit 571 million in the current immigration policy, which it's a little less than 1 million new immigrants annually. And they're saying that we're going to explode that somehow by removing the travel ban. But their other card from the uniqueness said similar things, and this is also from before the travel ban, so that also takes into account levels before the travel ban. So no matter what, it is then an inevitable impact and should just be disregarded. And they don't get 100% probability and magnitude because it's just not unique. Like, don't give them that. There's no brink to even establish how many immigrants we have to have before we have a water shortage to trigger any of the internal link story. Like, is it 50 million immigrants? Is it 200? Is it, what's the number? They can't tell you because the story's just not there. The uniqueness was just a bad mistake. The travel ban lowered that number and has already meant the statistic is going to be lower than expected. And the increased immigration back to those of 2017 means it's already lower than the projection. So either we are already too far gone and it's inevitable, or the AFF is not enough, and case will just outweigh because they aren't going to get access to the impacts on that flow. I mean, it just can't happen, or it's inevitably going to happen. So either we make things better for the time being and break down systems of Islamophobia, or we do nothing and eventually get screwed over anyway in, 100 years? And that's why the AFF needs to win today.
Everyone's in? Everyone ready? Cool. Congratulations to both teams for making it to the finals of the Andover tournament. It's an honor and a privilege to be judging and participating in this for the first time. The decision is a 6-1 for the negative. Let's hear it.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
I voted on the argument that I don't think this ad was written in the context of the travel ban, which means return it back to the levels it was at that point. I just like say something about it. Like you just keep saying like it's irrelevant, but like I need something to like you just be like, well, if you return to the levels they had, that's already unsustainable.
Yeah.
And like if you say that, then you get my ballot.
Okay.
And I don't think saying that they like dropped their framing contention in the 2AC really answers the framing contention. It's going to have ongoing answers.
Okay.
Also, don't say Trump when your impact's like literally 100 years from now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think your impact happens much more immediately. So
Okay.
even if that happens, but I'm wrong apparently. So.
I can go next. I voted that on the dissat, I think it outweighs the affirmative pretty easily. The only argument I have is the uniqueness evidence, but I don't think that the affirmative responds to the sort of Rubinstein and Cavero combination in the 2NR that answers it and provides a sort of trends of continual immigration status, which means even if you win that it's written before the travel ban, I think that they're winning that it doesn't matter because it's a continual trend that stays constant. And then in that case, I think they have an internal link and an impact that you don't have an answer to. And the scapegoating argument that I think is pretty devastating.
I'm gonna real quick follow that up. My decision was very similar. I voted on the dissad, even if I kind of feel Mike's arguments on this whole uniqueness question with the dissad. Even if I don't vote negative on the DA, I think that this functionally cold conceded brain drain argument is pretty devastating. There's not much of an impact out of it. Y'all had a bit of an embarrassment of riches in the 2NR where you kind of went for a lot of things, but didn't really hinder you too much this time. Absent that, I just don't have a clear articulation from the case about why the AF in a vacuum is like better for the status quo, even absent the dissad and the case turns. I think that the 1AR really made a pivotal decision by focusing on the circumvention argument instead of addressing the brain drain and some of the other like framing-esque arguments of the case, which just made it really easy to go on the dissad. Also, good decision. Go ahead for the DA.
I'll go. Yeah, mine's pretty similar. I voted on the dissat. I think the 2NR does enough work on this uniqueness question, obviously, because that was like the argument you had to answer. And I think the evidence is pretty good while explaining why immigration is the key issue, and that they're gonna trend that upward. Also, I do think the scapegoating argument is pretty good. I don't think the AF wins enough of the framing debate for me to just like not care about the extinction impact. It's not enough of the 2AR for me to be like, you know, this just completely conceded impact scenario, besides from like this uniqueness argument, just doesn't matter. So I would need way more there for that to be true. And even then, when you don't answer the scapegoating argument, I'm kind of feel like maybe the AF isn't so good in that area. So even under that framing, I think they got a little bit of offense.
So, I think it's really dangerous to assume we'll go for the K and then like spend a lot of time on the K between the undercover, the DA, and the 2AC and the 1AR. I think most of the 2AR's analysis on this side is rather new, and even if it wasn't new, I still think it's from the next still wins the uniqueness debate. I think this case turn is pretty devastating.
I honestly think you should have gone for framing in 2AR. That's what I would have done, and I almost voted AF on framing because I think you're true that they continue security discourse. I think you need more warrants as to why specifically, starting in the 1AR, why specifically the negatives argument on the DA continue and perpetuate the security discourse is uniquely bad for Islamic populations or just minority populations overall. I think that could have been a very viable strategy, and that's why it took me so long to type this out, because I was thinking about it for a minute. But I think that you were probably right that you get to act that Trump will scapegoat and attack Islamic populations. I just think you need more of an explanation you just like make this claim without having any sort of like warranted out analysis, and I think you really need that if you want to access any sort of ethics claims, as well as the existential impact. I think you win the existential impact, but yeah, I think that you contextualize your uniqueness wrong in the debate. So they're like, your uniqueness assumes a travel ban to exist. Your uniqueness isn't about immigration whatsoever, which is probably bad, but also like it's just about millennial trends. And so it says these millennial trends will continue, but any sort of change to anything outside of millennial trends is bad. It doesn't talk about immigration specifically, but your Faro evidence is really good on how immigration will increase the population by like 72 billion or whatever.
Yeah, just put that in one.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good card.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really
Says
good.
what you needed to say.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. Oh, you're still there.
Yeah.
But basically like all of that, and then also I feel like probably like more lame than the rest of them, like I get flow and everything, but like immediately when you guys started talking about how the population research was before the travel ban, but like your advocacy is to get rid of the travel ban. If that's the case, then we return to those pre-travel ban numbers, in which case they access their impacts anyways. So, yeah.
Get some OPOP discourse research.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to go for. Like, I thought you were going to like use their evidence about settler colonialism and say that the logic of the dissad or like anything else. Like when you were reading like Bostrom in the block, I was really like, I don't know if you saw my facial expressions, but I was like back here like scratching my head. Like I was trying to be like visibly like distressed that you're reading Bostrom. Like I was like, what are you doing if you're going for a sec call? Why are you saying these words right now? So, like I kind of knew you were gonna go for the dissad, but like you should also just be like, Bostrom is bad. Looking at like future generations is bad, and like use their own discourse on the K, even if you don't want to find the overpopulation cards, use their own discourse to turn.
On that same vein, you all need to be impact turning their arguments why security discourse is bad, right? They made an argument that's like security discourse framing, all of your extinction cards utilize that. If you win that security discourse framing is good, at that point you don't even need to win extinction, you just need to win that the rhetoric of the dissad is better than there.
Also, go for the brain drain argument.